In this video, we are looking at second order derivatives or second derivatives. The second derivative tells us the gradient of the gradient, whether the gradient is increasing or decreasing. So if our first derivative is dy dx, our second derivative is written in this notation, a d squared y dx squared. So our first derivative, second derivative. If our first derivative is f prime x, f dash x, our second derivative is f double dash x. And we're going to just differentiate twice. So our function, before I can differentiate it, I'm going to change 5 over x into 5x to the power of -1. So I'm going to get it in the right form to differentiate. And then I'm going to times by the power, take 1 off the power. So for the first derivative, for dy dx, times by the power, take 1 off the power, and times by the power, take 1 off the power. Then for our second derivative, again, times by the power, take 1 off the power. So 3/8 are 24, take 1 off the power, 3 take away 1 is 2, and then times by the power, -5 times -2 is +10, and -2 take away 1 is -3. So that's our second derivative, and it tells us the gradient of the gradient. One for you to try. Give it a go. So before we can differentiate, we want to expand these brackets to get it in the right form. So we've got 2x squared minus 10x plus 3x minus 15. Collect the like terms, 2x squared minus 7x minus 15. Then we can find our first derivative, times by the power, take 1 off the power. And our second derivative, which in this case is just 4. Here's another question. This time we've got different notation, but it's exactly the same. So we're going to find the first derivative and the second derivative. So our function, f of x, is x squared, and then we've got cube root x, which is the same as x to the power of 1/3. Then let's find the first derivative, times by the power, take 1 off the power, times by the power, take 1 off the power. And the second derivative, we just differentiate again, so the gradient of the gradient. So times by the power, take 1 off the power. And that is our answer. And again, one for you to try. Give it a go. So f of x, so divide both terms by x to get it in the right form to differentiate. So x cubed over x is x squared, and 5 over x is 5x to the power of -1. So let's find the first derivative. So x squared times by the power, take 1 off the power, that becomes 2x. And then 5x to the power of -1 is going to become -5x to the power of -2. To get the second derivative, we differentiate again. So we're differentiating the gradient function to find the gradient of the gradient. So 2x, the gradient of that part is just 2. And then -5x to the power of -2 times by the power, so that's +10. Take 1 off the power, -2 take away 1 is -3.